Absolutely. Even before I came to Washington as a policymaker, I had been working on federal background checks for all gun sales. I had been working on, legislation such as the Charleston loophole. So within the first 30 days of getting to Washington, I did what I told the people in my district I was elected to do. I put forth H.R. 8, which is federal background checks for all gun sales. Within the first 30 days, that bipartisan legislation did pass. However, it has been stalled, and it has not been taken up in the Republican Senate. H.R. 1112, which closes the Charleston loophole, the legislation by which we've been trying to put forth because of the Emanuel 9 shooting, that also has been stalled. Mitch McConnell has refused to take up that legislation in the Republican Senate. And of course, H.R. 3076, which is my bill of federal extreme risk protection order. I put forth that legislation specifically because of the the Parkland shooting, trying to make sure that when an individual seems to be in crisis, exhibiting dangerous behaviors, they have access to guns and to ammunition, making sure that the families and law enforcement and the judge can determine whether or not that individual should have access to guns. If it's deemed that they are considered a risk or posing a risk to themselves or their family or the community, taking those guns away for a certain period of time until it is deemed that they are no longer a risk, but also making sure that a federal background check is also given again to that individual prior to them receiving their arms again. These are just checks and balances. These are just common sense safety measures that don't infringe upon the rights of individuals who are law-abiding gun owners. As I said earlier tonight, there are hunters and there are, people that use their guns properly. And those aren't the ones that we're after. They don't need to be worried or afraid. But we do have a responsibility with the use of guns, making sure that those checks and balances are put in place to protect people, sometimes from themselves, but oftentimes, from people that should not have access to guns if they're domestic abusers or they have criminal histories. So that's all we're trying to do, is just make sure that there are common sense measures put in place to protect people so we don't have any more tragedies like we had again today.
That was going to be my next question. When you were walking in here today, there was an active shooter situation going on, and it may still be going on. What kind of went through your head as you're walking in to speak about gun prevention, and there's an active situation, a little bit different of a situation, but still, going on, and they're constantly going on.
Here we go again, and I am not surprised, as most of the nation is no longer surprised, and that's a tragedy in itself. That we have so much gun violence and so many tragedies, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, that it becomes commonplace, that it becomes our new normal, and that's not right.
The extremist bill you just mentioned real quick, has that already passed in the House?
No, it has not. It hasn't even gone through committee yet, okay. But my committee, Judiciary Committee, we're probably going to be called back early before our recess is over to debate those bills, okay. Talk about them in committee, and to mark them up.
Okay, so that'll be first.
Tell me how exactly that bill's supposed to work. I know there are a lot of people that I personally have spoken with who are just frightened to death of things like this because they're the top of the slippery slope to wholesale firearms confiscation in this country. My father witnessed that in World War II. It scared him to death.
Well, my answer to that is that we're just doing the best that we can to protect as many people as we possibly can. Now, one piece of legislation isn't going to solve the entire culture of gun violence. There'll be many pieces of legislation, many changes in the laws. But the most important thing that we have to understand is that each and every day that we refuse to keep people safe, more people continue to die. It will continue again and again and again, and we have a responsibility to keep as many people safe as we possibly can, and that's what we aim to do.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
This for Congresswoman McBath. We're a country of law and order, correct? How come one man called Mitch McConnell can stop us, can stop the Senate from voting. What is this? Is it constitutional? Is it against the Constitution? One man.
I agree with you, and there again, it's, trying to figure out how much authority and power can be given to one individual. I think that's the reason why we were trying as hard as we can to make sure that people understand what we have been able to accomplish in the House, the bills that we have passed to keep you safe, because sometimes certain voices are louder than others. But what we always want you to understand and know is that we are working as hard as we possibly can. We have put forth legislation, HR 8, HR 1112, HR 3076, and others that really are going to protect you. But there again, as long as we continue to talk about the fact that some voices are louder than others, as long as we continue to talk about the fact that there are people that are obstructing the ability for us to be safe, until we reconcile that and make sure people understand and know where the obstructions are coming from, once you have the knowledge, once you know better, you do better. And there again, we're going to be talking about things and actions that you can take in the future to prevent these kinds of, obstructions of justice, so to speak. But there again, yes, it's incumbent upon us to continue to let you know what we've accomplished on your behalf, so that you know, so that you have the knowledge. And that knowledge gives you power to make better decisions in the future.
How register people to voter perception?
This question is for Congresswoman. I know you all are working hard to pass the background check law. And I'm from a small town with about 20,000 people. And I lost my brother last year in August. And I want to know, have a bill came across the table to change the age limit that you can purchase a firearm.
It may have on a state level, but not yet on a federal level. Not yet. We've not had that legislation come forth. There are a lot of members that are beginning to put forth their legislation. Gun legislation, gun safety bills, but as to my knowledge, maybe there has been before I came to Congress, but at this point now, there's nothing that we are voting on in committee or has come before us in committee yet that addresses that. Of course, there are some people would say that, it's easier for you to get a license than it is for, it's easier for you to get a gun than it is to get a license. You're jumping through far more hoops, to get a license than you do a gun. I will tell you that there was a bill that was put forth by another colleague of mine that would actually allow young people to be able to get their licenses, at an earlier age. But there again, many of us were very concerned about that as well, because we just think at this point we don't want young people to be taken advantage of. And if we start opening that can of worms, they're going to be using young people for voting for all kinds of things. To my knowledge, maybe, as I said before, maybe that has happened before I've come to Congress, but as of yet, there's nothing that's been placed on the floor by any of my colleagues that addresses that.
One more.
Whole nation of individuals, but that's what we want you to concentrate on. We don't want you to feel afraid. We don't want you to be in fear of your lives. We want you to have the kind of life, to live the liberty that you should have at your age. And that means changing the laws. That is the broadest, most expansive way that we can protect you, so that people who should not have access to guns don't have access to guns. Now, be honest, there's the black market. We're never going to be able to take all the guns off the street. And there are a lot of law-abiding gun owners that are using their guns properly, that they're hunters or they use them for sport. And we have to be careful to make sure that we're not infringing upon their rights. But when we have people in the country that are using their guns any way they want to, deciding, you know, what they believe is a threat is not really a credible threat, and acting as vigilantes, and just out of hate or fear or bigotry are using their guns in the way that they're using them. We've got to be able to change the laws. We've got to change the way people are able to use their guns, but also protecting law-abiding gun owners, protecting their rights as well, but making sure that you never have to be afraid of sitting in your classroom. You never have to be in a lockdown drill. I heard an active lockdown drill. Someone sent me a tape of an active lockdown drill. And what they said to me is that, Congresswoman, this is happening right now. What are you going to do about it? And I was in so much pain because I felt like I wasn't working fast enough. I felt like I'm not doing enough. But I truly believe the best way to keep you safe is to change the laws, to prevent people who should not have access to guns if they're posing a threat to themselves, or they're domestic abusers, or they have criminal histories. In the long run, that's what you want, is something that's going to change culturally, the entire culture, because changing the culture is what really keeps you safe.